Hey guys, Luke McElroy from Mets. I've got Tyler on the camera here. We're going to go through an energy system interplay example. So a fair bit of confusion, quite a lot of questions came through on the Instagram page. So we just want to clarify max versus sub-max interplay and then go through a few examples as well. So a couple of things on the board. Let's just start with the graphs. We have a maximal example on the left-hand side here, and we have a sub-maximal example on the right. Let's come back and start at the max example. So this should look fairly familiar. They all look very, very similar. Now, you guys are going to need to understand rough interplay numbers for the max examples. It's fairly straightforward. We talk about max. We talk about the ATP-PC system being the dominant supplier for about 10 seconds. It's going to be the first one that increases contribution. You can see here it's going to peak. So peak contribution roughly 3 to 6 seconds, but still the dominant supplier all the way to about 10 seconds. We should understand that. Whilst that's happening, you can see as soon as we start exercise, all three energy systems are contributing to energy production, just in differing variations. So straight away they all go up. The anaerobic takes longer than the ATP-PC, and the aerobic takes the longest of the three. So here the anaerobic glycolysis system increases contribution. It becomes dominant after about 10 seconds. All right, it peaks its dominance at about 30. Whilst the aerobic is increasing contribution, it becomes dominant at about 60 to 75 seconds. All right, they're the rough numbers that you should need to know for a maximal example. This here is actually our power output, our intensity. Obviously, we peak when we're using the ATP-PC system. It has the quickest rate of energy production. The intensity is obviously going to drop off as the duration increases. All right, you cannot sprint for 5 minutes. The intensity must drop off. So energy system interplay at all stages throughout exercise. All three energy systems are contributing to energy production, but it is the intensity and the duration which determine the relative contribution of each. So in a moment when we come over to all of our sporting examples, these are the only two things we're interested in. Once we figure out that, we can figure out our energy system interplay. Duration can kind of come into two things. You can have a work duration, you can have a rest duration. All right, you talk about work to rest ratios in Unit 4. Let's come over to this example here. This is a sub-max. So let's say we're going out for just an easy 10 kilometre per hour jog. All right, the energy demand is going to be a lot lower. All right, a max would be somewhere up here. We are very much at a sub-max jog. All three energy systems are still going to contribute. We're still going to start with the ATP-PC system, use the anaerobic glycolysis system and the aerobic energy system as well. But what's going to happen is, look, we still have the same PC stores and we have a full passive recovery. We're still at the same total amount of ATP-PC or the PC stores, but we're not going to need the massive yield of it here. So we're going to use the ATP-PC system still. It's going to peak, have a lower peak compared to max, and it's going to take a lot longer for it actually to completely, well, 99.9% deplete. It's going to take longer. So over here, we have a big peak, and then all of a sudden it goes down to a minuscule amount of contribution quite quickly. But in a sub-max example, we're going to have a lower peak, but it's going to still contribute at a small amount for, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, even a minute, however long it is, all right? So it's going to take longer to deplete because we don't need it straight away. The reason we don't need it is because, well, it's not a massive change in intensity. We don't have much of an oxygen deficit. If I go from right now just standing to a slow walk, it's not like I'm going to explode with lactic acid. All right? I've increased the intensity. My heart rate probably needs to go from a heart rate of 50 to a heart rate of 55. It isn't a big deficit. So yes, the ATP-PC system will still increase contribution initially because it has to, but it might only take me 25 seconds for my aerobic energy system to become the dominant supplier. It's not a massive change. I'm not going from 50 heart rate to 180 heart rate. I'm going from 50 to 55 or 50 to 60. So what it's going to do is the aerobic energy system will become dominant a lot earlier in a sub-maximal example, which means that we can decrease the contribution from the anaerobic systems. It makes sense. Like when you start walking, you don't start filling up with lactic acid. Your legs don't burn going from resting to walking, or even from walking to a slow jog. You only get that big burn in the legs when you have a dramatic change in intensity, when you get a significant oxygen deficit. So when your acute responses have to increase a lot, that's when we start to get a fair chunk of anaerobic contribution, particularly anaerobic glycolysis, which leaves behind lactic acid, which is the burn that you feel. So what you need to understand, guys, is these rough numbers. 10 seconds ATP-PC, 60 to 75 seconds the aerobic will become dominant in a maximal example, and you won't have to know exact numbers for this. Just be aware that, hey, if it's a lower intensity, the aerobic energy system can become dominant pretty quickly because there's not that much change, which means we won't rely on the other ones, the anaerobic systems, as much.